thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about the fast 5 things you can do today to get ready for the cloud. All right. But to do that, I think I should do some introductions of who I am. My name is Robert Sirchia. I am a practice lead here at Magenic Technologies. We're a company based in Minneapolis, 8 locations around the globe, mostly in the United States. I have about 15 plus years experience working in .NET and Microsoft technologies. I've done large replatforming efforts to the platform, done large migration and modernization efforts to other clouds as well. I also worked in other industries such as real estate, financial institutions, politics, and energy and chemical. Now, if anyone here wants to talk politics afterwards, please get me at the end. We can talk about it, okay? But that being said, let's talk about who I'm not, okay? That's not me. So if you see that, I know you guys wanted to understand, my last name makes it think that I'm, Sriracha hot sauce. So, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the fast 5 things you can do to get ready for the cloud. Now, our approach is going to be in the context of .NET because I came from .NET, I enjoy .NET. So for us, we're going to talk about how that is, okay? But to do that, we need to talk about the 12 factors because the last thing you guys want to hear about is this again, because no one wants to hear about the 12 factors, right? But we're going to pick 5 of these. But if you want to do all 12, that's great. But also, to let you know, Kevin Hoffman wrote a book, and now there's 15 factors. And the book goes a little deeper on the 12 factors. So if you have an opportunity and you want to take a deeper dive on what this looks like, this is a great book to get. It's free. It still has relevant content today, okay? But let's talk about the fast 5. So these are the 5 that we've learned with our customers. If you address these things now, before you move to the cloud, it makes moving to the cloud a whole lot easier. So we'll talk about Codebase. We'll talk about configuration. We'll talk about build, release, run, disposability, and logs, okay? But first, in no particular order. So there's not 1 or 2 of these that you should do above anybody else. I like to say you should do all of them, but again, there's no order to this. So let's talk about code bases. One code base, tracked and revision control with many deployments, right? So what we've kind of done looks something similar to this, right? We have an app, we have an API, we have some batch jobs, not always. And when you look at that, that's kind of how most of our apps have been, right? You have nightly processors, monthly processors, you have APIs that talk to websites. And we've kind of structured this differently. Sometimes these are all in one solution file, sometimes these are in separate solutions, right? But going forward, we want to centralize it, right? So you want to look at all the code in a particular ecosystem, and you want to combine it. And I know it's kind of weird, and why would you want to do something like that? And I'll explain why here in a minute. It gives you an easy ability to move and refactor your code, all right? If you have logic that is sitting in 2 different places, it's kind of easy to put them all in one place and refactor it there, and you know where to cut lines with functionality, okay? And I think it's kind of addictive. Sometimes you'll see someone going, hey, I have a retry in a batch process, but I also have that in my API. And I'm going, well, if you make changes, you're making it in 2 different locations. And I see this quite frequently with some of our customers, all right? But this is also one area to refactor, consolidate, restructure, right? It makes CI/CD a lot easier because you only have one repository. But when you're thinking about going to the cloud, this entire conference, we've talked about what? We've talked about microservices. So this doesn't seem right, correct? That we're going to actually have all of our code in one area. But it gives us the ability to clean up the bad code rewritten, break domain lines out. So if you think about, I want to just put my account service here and I got to move it over, it's one place to do all that refactoring, okay? And that's important as we go forward because you're not doing it in multiple locations. So let's talk about branching. And previous jobs, I was the build and release coordinator. And in Microsoft, we did something similar to this, right? I have a develop branch, I have a QA branch, I have a release branch. And my build would build it, my deploy service would deploy it to each respectful environment. And I thought I was hot shit. Like, I thought this was amazing for it. And what happened is, developers would get all these changes in, and I had to literally do surgery on these changes because Johnny got Tommy's changes and Tommy's not ready to go to production, but I got to move them out. So I'm performing surgery. So in these changes, we were colliding going forward into QA. And I realized that this was a really bad idea, but this is what we were used to. So what does it look like going forward? Now, I don't espouse on this next slide by any means all of these are good, okay? All of them are a great alternative. Pick a modern branching strategy that works with your organization, okay? I've used all of them except for GitLab Flow, but I'm told it's really good. I don't know about it. But put in a modern branching strategy that you can have where you don't allow long-running branches, because a long-running branch will literally come back to haunt you because you're spending more time in the administration of pulling changes back into there, updating them, throwing it back to the developers to work on it. And then by the time it's going to production, so much has changed that you're literally performing surgery to get that into the next environment. And we shouldn't do that, all right? You want to push often and use feature flagging as much as possible. LaunchDarkly was a vendor here this week. I've used that product a lot. Makes production pushes the flip of a flag, less of actually pushing code. So if you think about it, you're going to push all these swarm features, but if you have them all turned off, it's a lot easier for you just to flip a switch. And if something goes awry, you flip a switch and it goes back, okay? So your branching strategy should look something like this. You have your master, you have your develop, you pull off a feature, you move your features back. You try not to have long-running branches. Getting in more and more changes back into the master branch for release is the easiest thing that you can do with your code base going forward, all right? And I see this a lot with customers going like, I got it, doesn't match our model of like project management. And we talk to them, you want to be more agile. This is one of those factors that you can do and change to be a little more agile with your code base and the changes you make, all right? So brings me to my next point. Build, release, run. Now again, I used to do build and release management. I thought I was the top of my game. I thought my career was over. I was gonna make CTO in about 20 minutes because I had all of this automated. But one of the things I used to do is this. This is a normal flow for us, right? I have my changes, checking that into release. I have my build server would then drop into a drive, my deploy server would pick it up and then deploy it to production. And all of a sudden, I'm missing a reference. Production's down, it's not working, I don't know what I need to do. Quick, the developer's like, I got my reference is off, I need that DLL, not this one. Okay, so what did I do? I copied it and put it on the server. I've done it, I'm guilty. And that's bad, because when you go to the cloud, you don't get that opportunity. You don't. Everything's immutable. You don't want to touch it. So getting into the discipline of not doing those types of bad habits is a lot easier. Or the other one is configuration. I didn't update it to config. It's still pointing to QA. It's QA data in production. I've done this. This is bad. And I've gone out there and I manually edited a config file, right? These are some of the things that we've done. And in the old world, that was acceptable. And it might be some things that your company does today. It's best practice to stop doing it and moving forward. So what does that look like? Making sure your build process pulls all the correct references. This is one of the easiest things that you can do, is to get your hands around what references you're pushing into production. All right, there's products like JFrog, something like that. I'm not trying to be a commercial, but it gives you the ability to grab the right version. What did InfoSec allow us to have to go to production with some of the third-party DLLs and references that you might have, okay? But then, what about the config file? I'll get to the config file in a minute, because you don't want to do config here anymore, all right? So that's one of the other things that you can do getting ready for that. Build once and deploy many, okay? Don't do a build per environment. I used to do it. I actually had build servers that were dedicated to QA. My deployment servers for production were literally dedicated for that, and it was not needed, okay? Deploying many kind of gives you the ability to know that whatever QA is tested, a stakeholder signed off on, is all the same, right? This gives you an easy way to also roll forward and roll back changes. And again, you're not in the cloud yet, so let's put it in the context of your current environment, like you know what to roll back to. You have a mark in time, okay? But one of the easiest things that it gives you is the ability to recapitulate a deployment for troubleshooting. Now, God forbid you have like a security incident, but if you did, security and compliance can now look at what that build looked like, and they have an instance of like, I can know what that's like. I can see it, what happened. The same thing when you have production issues. You can replay that in a different environment, and it makes life a whole lot easier, okay? All right, next, configuration. Love this one, it's one of my favorites. All right, with configuration, what does it look like today? It's the end all be all for us was the web config or the app config, right? So from your develop branch, your build servers would build an artifact, you'd come in, you have a base config file, and how many remember like the transforms? We still do that today, is with the prod, dev, QA transforms. We would do this in deploy. And this sounds great, but when you're getting ready to go to the cloud, you have to think about, I might be deploying my app 1,000 times, or something crazy like that. So if I change the config, what does that look like? I mean, I gotta now deploy all these artifacts. And I'm going, well, that's a lot. And if from there, I mean, I have more instances I have to deploy for dev to test, and it becomes kind of ridiculous after a while. You're deploying all of this for a one-line config change. And sure, your system can handle it, but you really don't want to do that because it puts a lot of stress on it. So going forward, and this is the one thing I espouse, is even though that you're not in the cloud, you can do this, is using configuration server, okay? And you can to centralize configurations into Git repository, Vault, local file system, and all of that is served up through config server. So if you think about your apps here, you have apps, you have, also got 3 of them, it can be Java, .NET, who cares, whatever. You have Spring Cloud config server. You back that with Git, and then you move all of those into Git. You allow SCS to serve them up and your apps to use them, okay? I've done this in traditional environments on Windows VMs. I've done it on Azure with a client that they run all of this within Azure as well, all right? And when you're thinking about this and you're like, wait, how is this? Wait, I'm not in the cloud. You can pull down config server and run it in Docker and run it pretty much anywhere. I think that's the mantra around Docker. You just bring your container and just have someone run it. We've done that as well for customers. Now, for the local developer experience, they can do the same thing. They can pull down the Docker image, serve up their configs, and make sure everything is aligned to what that looks like going forward. Did you get it all? You good? Okay. All right. This one's probably the hardest of all of them, and this is disposability. And when going to the cloud, applications that take a long time starting up really don't work well. And how many people in here have had to, write a batch job that goes out and warms up IIS? It's 2 in the morning, kick that server, make sure it's running, everything's loading up. The problem with it is when you get to the cloud, sometimes if it's starting up slow, you'll have stability issues because the cloud and their host may not understand what's going on, right? So it'll look at it going like, that's still not started. It's not healthy. I'm gonna destroy it and bring it back online because that's what we want the cloud to do, but it doesn't know that really you have a problem. You wanna look for start times less than 15 seconds, but ideally 500 milliseconds or less. And I know it's a hard ask, but it is. Now, to do that, a lot of customers would go, well, I'll just put in caching. Well, I'm gonna warn you now, that if you put in caching, that's great, and I encourage it, but make sure it's external. Companies like Redis and any other type of external caching is recommended before doing in-memory caching, okay? But on the other side, the inverse of what that is shutting down. Because shutdown has bigger consequences than startup. Startup, you can get in a lock when you're in the cloud where it's just like, this is not good, I'm gonna recycle it, I'm gonna delete it, create another one. Here, you risk losing data, okay? So one of the things that when you wanna address shutdown is you wanna make sure you don't lose any unit of work. If you have a process that runs for 20, 30 minutes in line, you have to break that up. And using other technologies to help break that up is important because when you get to the cloud doesn't really care if something's in the middle of a patch job. It really doesn't. If it knows the container's not right, it will recycle it, it will delete it, create a new instance, and it's ideally bad, okay? So, shutdown time, less than 5 seconds. If it's taking longer than that, you have to address it. Ideally, 250, 300 milliseconds or less. Try to shoot for sub 1 second if you can. All right. And then lastly with this is the shutdown process should not result in a loss of work. That is critical. So if you have to put something else in line with it, every application is different. So you're going to have to think outside the box when you address that. Lastly, I believe it's lastly, I think so. I think we're on 4, this might be 5, is logging. All right, and in the cloud, you want to treat logs as event streams. And yet we're not in the cloud. So how am I going to do that? I can't redo everything, right? So the logging today, we've written to the file system. We log from multiple locations. I've seen this with customers quite frequently, more so than I want to admit to you. We log to the event viewer, right? And if we're moving from Linux or from Windows containers to Linux containers, you don't have an event viewer. It doesn't exist for you. But one of the things that stands out with all of this is the logging from multiple locations. Logging is important when you get to the cloud. And when your app is, you are logging and you're writing to different areas through different sections of your code, troubleshooting and changing that when you go to the cloud is going to be a terrible pain in the butt. So first is to try to centralize on a single logging framework. I've used all of them. These are great. I'm a big fan of Microsoft extension logging. If you can, use platform native logging. This is one of the things that you can do right now to make your lives easier. Have one. Don't have your code have 2. Adjust your code to have one endpoint that actually does the writing. And it can still write to the file system. I'm not saying change that. Keep it in line to what your current environment has, right? So if you're writing to the file system and something's picking up and processing, or you're writing to I don't care, you shouldn't care, but just have one place in your code that does it. Because when you change it, you have one place that you're gonna change it, okay? And lastly is that you wanna make sure that your logs are flushed aggressively. And what I mean by that is if an application crashes and the log is not flushed, you will lose data in the logging, and you really don't see exactly what happened, and it makes it problematic when you're going and doing logging in the cloud. So, logging moving forward. It's a good practice, and we tell customers this all the time. I tell some of our staff members this quite frequently. My cohort, Stuart, beats this into pretty much everybody. When you want to log all good things, do standard out. And when you're allowed to do all the bad things, you do standard error. That is an easy way to kind of understand what's going on in your logging strategy. And it makes life easier moving forward. So you want to go something that looks like this, right? Where you're logging on multiple locations. It's crazy to something like that. Now, I'm not going to espouse on, should you be logging from the controller? Should you be logging? Don't change that. Because when you start changing the location of where you're logging and you have an error that reoccurs and you know it, and you change where you're logging from in your code, and you're like, oh, I cleaned that up. You might see a new log. You might see a new error. and you're not understanding because you don't, it's a red herring going forward, okay? So don't change, like, hey, we only write from the services. Pull it all out of the controller, because that's not going to help you when you modernize to the cloud. Is that it for logging? And the short answer is no. All right, this is just the start, and when we learned about the chaotic way of moving to the cloud with your applications. This is just the start. This is not your end-all, be-all logging strategy, and I want to disclaim that right now. So logging is one of the most important things we do when we migrate to the cloud, because you need to see what the hell's going on. You really need to understand what it is in your application that's happening, and this is not an end-all, be-all for you in your logging strategy, okay? I kind of say it there. So, there's 5 things that we talked about. We talked about disposability. We talked about logging, Codebase, treating build, release, run as separate services, and configuration. Now, in no particular order, you can pick up one of these things and champion it through. If it's logging, it's going to be a lot harder because your code probably has it. Now, if you already standardize on a particular logging framework and you're already there, awesome, great. You're getting ready for the cloud. Know where that's at. Know how to change that in the configurations going forward. All right. If configuration's an issue that you guys want to tackle, pull down SCS. Move your configurations over and use a provider such as SteelToed to serve up your configuration files. It's a quick, easy way for you to start moving towards the cloud. All right. Of all of them, disposability is going to be the one that I've seen customers struggle on the most, because it's an old legacy app, and they focus on, I got to get this to this point, get it closer. When you start modernizing to the cloud, it'll be a lot easier for that. Okay. Just on time. So, first of all, stay connected with us. I'm supposed to actually talk about what talks are next that are with it, but actually those talks were before mine, so I couldn't tell you that. But I'm gonna leave you with this. Make us proud, be prepared for the cloud, okay? Small little things you can do now, work them into your current delivery cycles to clean that up, all right? So here's some things. 1, start somewhere. Start somewhere, pick one. It could be, logging, it could be whatever, all right? Giving you 5 examples here of where to start it. And you don't have to take on everything at once with logging. You don't. If you have multiple logging frameworks in there and you pull out and you centralize on one, great. That's a great step. Get that into production. Look at it, monitor it, see what it's like. And lastly, I cannot espouse this enough, is to document well. The changes that you are making are very important, and if you don't know what you've done, your operations team is gonna have a hell of a time looking at things like logs going, what happened? How does this work? Why are we getting a different error? What's the issues with that? Okay. And thank you. I'm right on time for that one. So, thank you. Questions? That's where you guys can beat me up. No?
For configuration, other than Git, what are the other strategies like database?
We've used Vault and we've used local file system. And again, it depends on, your change control. The question was for configuration and what is the backing services that we've used. And I'll see if I can slide over to that slide. This one. Yes. Instead of Git, we've used Vault. We've used local file system. It depends on your particular change control environment. So if it's just storing it in Git and it's a pull request to change it, that's generally what we've seen customers use. Vault is used for a little more security. File system's great if you're just doing it locally. I don't recommend using Git for that. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, so config server handles, and I guess I probably should have talked about it a lot more. Config server actually has the ability to put in hyphenated environmental variables that you can have. So you can point to one config server and then have your app have environmental awareness, knowing where it's at. So for it knows it's in dev, and when you get to the cloud, the environment sets it up. When you get here, you will actually have to probably narrow it down to you have a config server for each environment. But going forward, you can have one and just have different flags on each of those files. And it works very similarly to how we do transforms, where it overlays the new environmental variables or the new configuration variables on what it serves up in the JSON file.
I have multiple apps, same app for multiple, if you will, clients.
Okay.
So I don't want them all to be hit and get there because that's going to be a nice retention issue.
We haven't seen that. I mean, how many apps are you running? Because we've run config server having over 1,000 apps hitting. They're hitting one Git repo. So.
We got about 1,000.
Okay. So, I mean, we've had it, so one of the customers we did this with, we had over 1,000 apps in production. And then what I mean by apps, so these are microservices, and they're each hitting config server to get their environmental variables on load up. Correct. You do not want to put passwords or anything like that in Git in plain text. I'm not Yes, someone knows the URL entrance, and they can probably go and see it. So again, you don't want to do that. That's why Vault's an important tool to have. Mm-hmm.
How would you put that through config server? Do you know?
Are you saying to pull data out of a database and have config server serve it up? It's probably best left where it's at if you're using databases to do your configuration. Because it's going to, in the 12 factor, you're going to treat that as an underlying service for configuration. And you'll probably have issues on startup and when you load. So you're making an extra call. That would be something that using an external caching when the app loads could solve for you.
Well, one of my issues with configuration is that too many hands in each other.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons why I use config server to secure it, and also to version it because then, I know we did it, I can back it off.
Okay. Any other questions? I got like less than a minute. All right, thank you guys. I hope you guys all enjoyed the conference. Downstairs is a big party. I know it's hard. It started at 6, and you guys are like, I'm not getting a beer just yet. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.